Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session on human rights and sporting mega events. We have quite a lot of issues to cover this morning. My name is Piara Power. I'm from an organization called the Fair Network. We work with a number of governing bodies across Europe and internationally on issues related to anti-discrimination and social inclusion in football. And mega events and the presence or lack of human rights preventions at sporting mega events is one of those issues. But this morning I want to introduce my panel who are coming from some top-level NGOs and governing bodies. Let's start with Marc Joly, the closest to me, who is from, sorry, in the middle there, who is from Terre. Just a quick round of applause for Marc. Let's keep this rolling as much as we can. Closest to me is Guy Price from UNICEF UK. A round of applause for Marc. Next to Marc there is Patrick Gasser, who is Head of Social Responsibility at UEFA, the European governing body of football. And last but not least, on the end, is Wroe from Street Child United.
Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Now I think what we're going to do in a few minutes is define the issues in terms of human rights and mega sporting events. But before we do that, if I can ask each of our panelists to give us 2 minutes on their work, their focus on mega events, and some of the issues as they see them. Let's start with Guy Price from UNICEF.
Thank you, Pierre, and good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. So I am Head of Sport at UNICEF UK, which puts me in the very privileged and exciting position of being able to combine the power of sport with one of the most important causes that there is. So a very little bit about UNICEF to kick off. UNICEF obviously started life after World War II in Europe as the United Nations Children's Emergency Fund, and now 70 years on operates in 190 countries around the world, so nearly all of the countries around the world, where we work to defend and protect the rights of every child. Our mandate is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which came into force in the UK in 1992. And UNICEF UK is one of 34 national committees for UNICEF around the world, and it's tasked with communicating and advocating for and on behalf of children around the world, and also, importantly, with raising funds to enable our work around the world on behalf of children to be delivered and to take place. None of our funding comes from the United Nations per se. Every penny or dime that UNICEF spends is raised by UNICEF itself. And in the UK, for example, that's around about £100 million a year coming from our generous supporters and partners. And that contributes to an overall UNICEF global budget of about £5 billion a year spent on children, delivering outcomes for children around the world. Our focus and mission here in the UK is to respond to every child who is in danger, whether that's from violence or exploitation or abuse or disease, hunger, war or natural disaster. And sport is a particularly important area for us here in the UK, in UNICEF. It's a priority area for intervention and opportunity for us, because in and of itself, obviously, sport is and should be one of the most positive forces for good for children, with its inherent values of fair play, dignity, humanity, etc. So our aim is to leverage as much of that good that sport can do for children, to maximise that, but also to mitigate any of the negative impacts that sport can or might have on children. And mega sporting events, obviously, as a key part of that and a priority for us, and derives from some of the very important work that we did with Glasgow in 2014 around the Commonwealth Games. So that's a very quick introduction to UNICEF, UNICEF UK, and the work we do in sport.
Thanks very much, Guy. I like a guy who uses an iPad Pro so well with his pencil. Marc, can I ask you to tell us a little bit about Terre des Hommes' work in mega sporting events?
Yes, so my name is Marc Joly. I'm heading the campaign called Children Win, which is the main feature connecting Terre des Hommes, which is a child relief and child rights organization founded 50 years ago, more in the Francophone world, discussing with Guy just before, as we are in a more Anglophone context, it's imagining a shrinked Save the Children type of organization to give you the picture of it. I really, so it's basically about protecting children, and in that respect we have identified mega sporting events as one of the issues that can help us tackle and engage with stakeholders outside of the NGO world to mitigate risks for children in that context. So we are basically running the campaign aiming at having mega sporting events such as the World Cup, the Commonwealth Games, or the Olympic Games organized in a way that respects children's rights in particular, because this is our focus, but more broadly as well human rights, because there are many other human rights issues than not only child rights issues connected to that. So for us, it's about engaging with the sport governing bodies, about finding out solutions to mitigate these risks and to have the mega sporting events organized and keeping the positive sides of it in that respect. So that's.
Thank you. You've got a very short film, I think, that you wanted to show us. Can you give us the context and we can show the film?
Yeah, that helps set the issue as well. Yeah. Well, if not, we can.
Children need to be safe and protected. But too often, when mega sporting events like the Olympic Games or the World Cup come to town, children are put in harm's way. During preparations for the 2014 World Cup and 2016 Olympic Games in Brazil, many young people were hurt and incarcerated by army and police. More than 22,000 families were forced from their homes. Safe communities were torn apart to make way for the events. This can never be allowed to happen again. Now, for the first time, the International Olympic Committee has incorporated human rights principles into its host city contract for the 2024 and 2028 Games. In September, Paris and Los Angeles will sign on the dotted line. We call on them and all Olympic host cities to commit to respecting child and human rights. Promises on paper are not enough. They must become a reality. Help keep up the pressure on the IOC and hosting cities so that they keep their promises. Follow Children Win on Twitter and Facebook and share this video.
Okay, that's great. John, can I jump, Patrick, and come to you from Street Child United? If you could just give us a couple of minutes on your work around mega sporting events and child rights.
Sure. John Wroe, founder and chief executive of Street Child United. We're about creating a global platform for street children's voices to be heard. Guy's organisation UNICEF estimate that worldwide there are 150 million street-connected children. By population, that makes them the 9th biggest country in the world. They face stigma and abuse, and our job is to get people to see their potential, to see them at their best, and to change the way that people see them, and then change the way that they are treated. And we do that using sport. So we held the first Street Child World Cup in Durban in South Africa in 2010 with 8 teams. Tanzania lost to India in a disputed penalty. We then went on to Brazil and had 25 teams. And we're now firmly on the way to Russia. Our ambition is to turf red square green for street children's rights. We use art and sport to change the way that street children are seen and treated. And our young people have 3 key demands: access to education, protection from violence, and birth registration. If we could have the first picture up from South Africa in 2010 in relation to major sporting rights. But I can just say a couple of things about protection from violence. Ahead of the Street Child World Cup, our partner organisation, street children, called Antombo, street children suffered from roundups. You've seen homeless people in Manchester this week. So in Durban, and this is quite common in many countries, kids on the streets are simply rounded up. It's a completely futile policy, and it's simply to make the streets look good. It's to make the city look good when people come visit. So this is a police van, and where kids are just thrown in the back, driven 70 miles away and dumped, and then asked, basically have to find their own way back to the city. Our partner project had been campaigning for 10 years to get this to stop. And there's many reasons why it continued, but the city were in complete denial about it. If we could have the next slide. This is a photograph of a sign within the Metro Police Station. It says beach cleaning operation. Clean up vagrants, street kids, beggars, and debris. What we're saying is if you see street children as rubbish, you'll treat them as rubbish. If you see them as humans, you'll give them their rights. We were motivated at the start. We were started by children, by street children in South Africa. The idea of a Street Child World Cup came from an 8-year-old girl, and we're inspired by a boy called Andile, who said, when people see me on the streets, they say I am a street child. But when they see me playing football, they say I am a person.
Thanks. That's great. Patrick, as a European governing body, as a confederation, what is your link to human rights, mega events? How do you approach the protection of human rights at mega events? In the main, I guess for you, that would be the European Championships. But also you could say that the Champions League final is increasingly taking on the aura, the status of a mega event.
Yeah, that's right, Piara. I would like to put that just into a bigger context. It is for the first time for Euro 2016 that we included social responsibility and sustainability criteria into the bidding process. And so there is a lead time of at least 7 years up to a tournament like this. So that takes us back to 2009. So that was quite a major breakthrough. Now, in the development of that, we have included the criteria on human rights for the first time in view of the next mega event, which is Euro 2024. So that was another major milestone to complete the social responsibility and sustainability criteria, enhancing them with human rights criteria. Now, we did that obviously before we knew who are going to be the National Association bidding for 2024. In the meantime, we know that's Germany and Turkey. At the same time, we have started to open a bidding process in order to stage our major club competition finals, like the Europa League final and the Champions League final. And for the 2020 bidding process, human rights criteria will also be part of the bidding process. Now, that's one side of the issue. And that's the start, but we're also getting into touch with our sponsors and the whole supply chain to address issues of human rights for the future. So there is, we had a good start, but there is much more to do on all these aspects.
Patrick, just can I pick up on some of the things you've said, because we've had some of the issues set out for us by these guys, particularly in terms of child rights and mega sporting events, whether we're using the sporting event as a focus to highlight child rights and lack of, or whether we are concerned about the way in which child rights are diminished at sporting events. The criteria that you talk about, what areas does it cover? Is there a list of 5, 10, 15 issues that you're particularly concerned about?
Well, in the process, we looked at the United Nations Guiding Principles for Human Rights and included them. We also looked for help because it's not really that we have the expertise inside. So we got expert advice on the process from leading NGOs, the Sports and Rights Alliance, which helped us to weigh all these key criteria into the bidding documents, which we then throw at the bidders, which have to come back and make the necessary declarations, confirm that the Convention for Child Rights and the ILO and human rights aspects are covered.
So International Labour Organization, which looks at migrant construction workers. Yeah. Marc, Terre des Hommes is part of a FIFA task force or grouping on human rights and mega events. Could you give us an insight on their approach to safeguarding human rights?
I think just maybe to add on to what Patrick just said, I think it's important to understand that basically what we are asking the sport governing bodies when it comes to establish a requirement for human rights, and what we expect from the bidding federations actually is to conduct a process that is quite widespread throughout the business world, which is a risk assessment. So going back to what you were saying, what are the issues or what are the main issues, it's basically first to say, well, this human rights issue needs to be assessed first, and you need to conduct a risk assessment and saying, okay, I want to organize the Olympic Games in such and such years. We will need to construct a lot of infrastructure. So clearly the risk for labor rights issues comes up on the agenda. We will have thousands of garments that will be worn by the volunteers during the event, produced maybe sometimes even in countries like Bangladesh. Okay, there is a child labor issue risk that we need to mitigate. So this is basically the mechanics that needs to be taken on by the bidders, and we are advocating for to bid on that. So to go back now to your questions around FIFA and the elements and the participation, for example, of Terre des Hommes in the Human Rights Advisory Board. We have an expert from us sitting there. It calls for me a second remark, which is basically that it's important that the sport governing body owns the process. It's not something, I mean, of course you can provide expertise from the outside, and that's exactly what the Human Rights Advisory Body does to FIFA. But however, FIFA has put quite a lot of means into place in order to build its own capacity, in order to manage it, because in the long run and in a sustainable manner, they will be the ones needing to mitigate these risks or identify these risks in the coming years, and evaluating, for example, bidding dossiers that are coming in or bidding candidacies coming in order to go ahead. So for me, it's something very important. And again, there is no one size fits all. That's the last remark I'm going to make here. It's basically to own the process. Okay, FIFA does it one way, UEFA has another way, IOC a third way, Commonwealth Games certainly working with UNICEF a fourth one. And I think the most important one is the issue needs to be kept in focus, and then there are many ways where you can reach the fact of having human rights requirements respected.
So we're trying to encourage country hosts, city hosts to make an assessment themselves of the risks and to deal with those in a proactive way. Now, if we get down to defining what the risks are generally, I think we can generalize based on, say, the last 3 or 4 World Cups, the last 3 or 4 Olympics. I mean, from all of the panel here, I would say, of course, we're talking about child rights. We're talking about forced removals, people who are forced to leave their homes because there's a stadium being built or there's a cleanup operation. What are the other sort of things that we're looking at that arise as a result of a direct Olympic Games or World Cup or other sporting event?
I think that a big issue, and Marc has alluded to it, is the awareness and the understanding of all of the actors who are involved, starting with the rights holders and the event owners. And I think it might help if we talk about a practical example. We've talked about forthcoming World Cups and Olympics during the 2020s, but actually we at UNICEF are working very closely with the Commonwealth Games Federation based on a relationship that started with them in 2014 around the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. Over the coming years, we'll be working with them around events, this year in the Bahamas, with the Commonwealth Youth Games, the Commonwealth Games next year in Gold Coast, the Youth Games back in Belfast in 2021, and then we have an opportunity that's actually dropped into our lap, really, with Durban dropping out of the 2022 Commonwealth Games. So this year we've worked very closely on the ground with colleagues in the Bahamas and the Commonwealth Games, which is actually taking the policy end of the discussions, which we're all involved in, and working on implementation on the ground. So we've worked closely with government officials in the Bahamas, with young athletes, with international federations, with local sports federations in the Bahamas, actually delivering awareness raising and policies around child safeguarding and child rights and human rights in the Bahamas. So a very simple issue, very simple example that came up earlier this year was around the provision of medical support and medical supplies for athletes during the youth games. Now, the previous scenario would have been that local ambulances, local medical staff would have been diverted away from what they were doing to support the games themselves. Therefore, the resident population would have been at risk because those services would not have been available to them during the games. So we work with local partners on the ground to ensure that people still had access to emergency ambulances and emergency medical services during the course of a mega sporting event. It's those very practical things that I think the organisers, the event owners need to understand, and we need to get to the point of implementing it at the same time as talking about the very serious and big policy issues as well.
Yeah, just to add on, and indeed it goes from the very concrete issues Guy just referred to the indeed the more broader ones, and certainly where you have infrastructure, there is the question of the labor rights. This is certainly something to be taken into consideration about mitigating and how it's done. And this is clearly the case, has been clearly the case in the Russia 2018 as well as Qatar. So we know that FIFA, along with the Russian organizing committee, has set up some monitoring system in order to identify what are the issues and try to come up with remedies in order to mitigate these risks and the labor rights problems that have arisen. Then you have certainly, you referred to it, removals. So in the case of Brazil, the Rio 2016 Olympic Games had to make way. You've seen in the short film, 22,000 families had to be relocated. And this clicks into, for example, child rights. That's where we come, for example, because you can have children that have been relocated 60 kilometers away from the place they were in, but still there is no school there. There is no health access to proper health care because the healthcare system is not yet ready. So it means that children are skipping years in school or not having a proper medical attention available in their surrounding. So again, it's about imagining that for an event that lasts 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you are changing the lives of quite a sizable amount of people for their entire life. And so our discourse is about to say, okay, this is happening and it's an inspiring event and it needs to be inspiring, but it cannot be run at whatever cost, and you need to take that into consideration in order to mitigate it.
Okay, John, I think you were going to...
Yeah, I'm glad Guy mentioned about child safeguarding and delivered locally. Let me just finish the story off about the roundups. So you need a bit of luck with this as well. We had a photographer with us who was also rounded up, taking pictures of a roundup, which is how we got that picture. And as a result of that, huge amount of pressure was put on the Durban municipality to stop this. This has been something they'd been in denial about. But the Sun newspaper did 3 two-page spreads. The headline was child catchers. And the international press picked up on that, and suddenly the city was getting it very embarrassed. And I think FIFA were a bit embarrassed for them as well, about what on earth is going on, why are you doing this? We had an arts exhibition at the Street Child World Cup, delivered with local artists on child's rights. It was in the main gallery. And we trained local street children to be the gallery guides. And that continued throughout the FIFA World Cup. The centerpiece of that art gallery was a sculpture of a Metro cop beating a street child. And the thing that tipped it was the chief executive of Deloitte in South Africa. When he came out and said, and he was the organization sponsor, when he said, roundups of children in our country is completely unacceptable, the city had to do something about it. As a result of the Street Child World Cup and lots of work from local partners over a long period of time, the responsibility for street children has shifted from security to child welfare. There's a much better joined up approach to all the organisations that have responsibility for street children in Durban. But it took the global media and the visit of the World Cup to that country to shine a focus on that and to be a catalyst for change.
So that's a positive legacy. I mean, you talked about responsibility there. It took an intervention from a sponsor or a big corporate to change the way in which Durban was looking at these street kids. Where does responsibility lie in terms of making sure that the dislocation, the abuse of rights is minimized at the very least? Is it with national governments, local authorities, the owner of the rights of that sporting competition? Where does it lie? Can we pinpoint that?
Well, I think mega sporting events, especially of the scope of a World Cup, Euro, or especially as well Olympic Games, is a very complex animal. So it has a lot. It implies a lot of supply chains, a lot of levels, and it's relatively complex. So indeed, the responsibility lies not only at the level of the sport governing bodies, it lies as well at the local organizing committee that is being set up, and in certain instances, such as the Olympic Games, it has quite a lot of power about the implementation of the delivery of the mega sporting event itself. Then you have indeed the municipalities managing the local government. So and indeed then the corporates have as well their responsibility in making sure their supply chains is child free. So it's about I think that in this whole set of responsibility, however, the sport governing body is in a quite unique situation to be able to set actually the criteria right from the start. And in saying, okay, listen, you want to host the World Cup or you want to host the Olympic Games, you need to fill these criteria. And this is now what we are trying to really bring them about and to push them about. And I think that's a nice way as well to be at the center of all the supply chains, hoping that it will trickle down then, that the responsibility in phase with the responsibilities of all the other actors as well.
I think there are two answers to that question, Pierre. I think Marc has given the first answer, which is that ultimately, yes, it's the responsibility of the event owner, the rights owner, to make sure that human rights, child rights are integral to the event. But in the absence of that, which is where we have been in the past and to an extent where we still are, in the absence of that, there is still a responsibility incumbent on all of us, all sponsors, all corporates, all commercial partners, and particularly, as we've heard from John, on local, national or global NGOs as well. So I think the example that we've heard from South Africa from John is very important as well. We were involved and engaged in South Africa too in 2010 and worked with FIFA and with the municipalities and the host cities there to put child-friendly zones into all of the FIFA fan fests that were operated there. And as a direct result of that, a hard and fast result of implementing something, doing something on the ground, taking responsibility, we reunited nearly 200 children who were separated from their parents or carers in those fan zones. Now, without us and our local partners doing that, taking up that responsibility, then those children wouldn't have been reunited as efficiently, as quickly as they were, and would have been at more risk. So yes, the responsibility goes all the way on that sliding scale from the event owners and the rights holders, all the way through to us and local charities and NGOs. We all have a responsibility to act, even if there is a vacuum around policy and selection criteria, etc.
So Patrick, I want to come back to you as the owner of a competition. If we take the European Championships and somebody fulfills the criteria during the bid period, but in the delivery phase, it's quite clear that there are abuses of human rights going on. When would you step in, either give them a warning, or perhaps the ultimate sanction you have is to say, this event will no longer be held here. We're going to shift it to another country, another city, where they can deliver. What can you do that? Do you have those the ability to do that?
Well, I don't know. We have just started now building these criteria into our bidding processes, and we'll see. And that was probably the easy part. But if you look at the European context and where we have held our mega events in the past, let's go back as far as 2000, Belgium, Holland, quid human rights issues. Then 2004, Portugal, quid human rights issues. 2008, Austria, Switzerland, quid human rights issues. And I can go on now all the way to France, 2016. So we were probably not very much exposed to the kind of problem at hand, except that I think, and I said that in my introduction, that we will also want to build these criteria into our contracts with our suppliers and manage our supply chain. And I think that's important, as well as see how we can deal with these issues with our major sponsors. Now, if you look to the future, we have a Euro 2020 coming up. We have 13 host cities, and probably we have 11, which I can already tell we probably won't have a problem in terms of human rights to face. There are probably 2 host cities where it might be a bit more tricky, and not to name them St. Petersburg and Baku. And in terms of the Russian context, we'll have a World Cup before that, 2 years, so that will probably help in the process. So in football terms, that's, if I may, an 11-2 result, which is not at all that bad. We'll certainly try to manage that, and that was a period before we had the integrated human rights criteria. Now, we conduct this not in the spirit to exclude somebody in the bidding process, but to bring the issues to the table. And I think if this is a big topic now, it's also because mega events were in the past awarded into difficult contexts, which brought the issues to the table, and I think will make the issues progress in the right direction, which is a positive impact, and give credit to the Olympic movement and FIFA, because they trigger indirectly that process, which is a difficult one.
So the last point you make is about how increasingly, particularly for Olympic Games, the bidders are from countries which don't perhaps have a historically good record on human rights. The democratic infrastructure is not the same as in Western Europe. I think we're talking about places like China. If they were to bid again, for example, for a World Cup 2030, everyone's talking about it. Potentially FIFA might have to say no under the new criteria, Marc.
Again, it's as Patrick just mentioned, we shouldn't be excluding right from the start any countries from bidding. So everybody has to write. But then indeed, it will be the question. So there will be a human rights requirements already in the bidding documents for 2026. That's certainly coming on now at FIFA level. So the human rights requirement will certainly be in the bidding documents for 2030. And then, of course, in the bidding phase, basically you ask the federation, give us your plan on how you want to conduct the risk assessment and these elements.
So not to interrupt you, because yeah. I mean, we're covering some good ground here, but I guess for me, what I want to know is when can I form an alliance as an NGO with other NGOs to say, this is too far. This country or this city is not meeting the requirements set out by governing bodies, whether it's the IOC, FIFA or UEFA, and they should now have this event withdrawn from them. When do we do that? Is there a line that the NGOs have set out? We don't want to talk too much about red lines, but they exist.
But to withdraw it, you need to award it, and that's my point I wanted to make, basically. In having now the human rights requirement in the bidding process, there is a first hurdle, let's say, of having to award the World Cup in this case to a country that will have to explain, in this case, in your theoretical case, China, will have to explain how they plan to mitigate the risks they have assessed in terms of human rights in the context of the World Cup. So is the plan credible or not credible? That's going to be the first question that's going to arise when it comes to awarding. So let's hope at that stage that indeed if there are some, and you can imagine there can be some discrepancies between the evaluation on the answer of the Chinese Football Federation in that case, then indeed it's the sport governing body to take its responsibility to award or not award on this criteria. I think the big question will be about weighting the weight of the human rights criteria in all the requirements that are needed, to organize a mega sporting event. That's still a big question mark, and again, we are at the beginning of the journey, so we haven't yet come to the fact of, evaluation of bidding dossiers coming in and how the sport governing body manages that phase. So this is still something to be written out, but indeed, question will be more likely to be raised, at least on these elements, because we have now these requirements there.
Guy, in terms of, we're talking about World Cups and European Championships and Olympic Games, but there's a lot of mega events going on. You're talking about, I think, planning for the Cricket World Cup in 2019.
Yes, we have, UNICEF has a global partnership with the ICC, so the Cricket World Cup in 2019 will be held here in England and Wales. I think that's probably too early. We've spoken about the lead time for these events and the scale of the work that goes into introducing human rights, child rights concepts and criteria into all the bidding documents. We will certainly be working with the ICC and we'll be talking to them about human and child rights in relation to 2019. In fact, we've started that conversation already. I think a probably more important example is the one I've mentioned already around the Commonwealth Games. And it's interesting that Durban has cropped up in a different context already, because Durban was slated to be the host of the 2022 Commonwealth Games. Obviously, they withdrew because of financial issues. And since then, the Commonwealth Games Federation has been currently looking for a replacement host for 2022. And it's likely, because of our relationship now and the work that we do with Terre, our relationship with the Commonwealth Games Federation, that we are able currently to insert child and human rights considerations and criteria into all of the current and ongoing bidding processes and selection processes for 2022. So our hope is that the 2022 Commonwealth Games will be, or is likely to be, the first mega sporting event to have explicit child and human rights considerations built into that event from the very outset, and I think that's a very exciting proposition. That then takes us to a point where Marc was talking about future events, 2028, 2030, where the precedent of having those criteria built in explicitly from the outset has been set, and I think that's an important achievement for us.
So I'm going to wrap up in a few minutes, but if anyone's got a question from the floor, please raise your hand, so I'll come back to you in a minute. Just from you guys, I get a sense that things are moving in the right direction, particularly over the last year, with the criteria that UEFA has now put into bidding documents. FIFA have also been through an approval process. If there's one thing that you think remains to be done in this area to protect human rights around SMEs, what would that be? MSEs. John, let's start with you.
We've got great examples of projects that are working closely with police, because for us it's about street children and protection from violence. So our project in Kenya, in Mombasa, is doing work in restorative justice with street children and the local police force. So when the captain of our team Kenya, Benson, sat down with the police in a workshop and pointed to his missing teeth and could say to the police officer, "This happened when I was 6, when you threw me in the back of that van." I think that has enormous power on that police officer and the conversations that then go on in that scenario.
So we would say more education of the impact.
More education and dialogue. In Tanzania, we have the police having an annual football match with police officers.
Okay.
In Pakistan, we've got police officers and street child organisations delivering child protection together. So much more understanding of the other from both sides.
Thanks. Patrick, from your perspective, is there one thing that you could wish for? Maybe take your UEFA hat off if you can for a minute. Is there one thing that you think we need to do, that needs to be done to make?
Well, I think there's a tremendous challenge to put these criteria. I'm making the part of the system globally, and this right now has been the easy part to put the criteria out. Now we expect the bids and need to evaluate that we need to deliver in the process. So there is a, it's a start, but there is much more to come.
So I'm going to read your coded Swiss language. You mean you want more internal enforcement? You want internal enforcement for the criteria that have been laid down, which probably is not with you, but
I think it's a process, all right? And we need to give it time to let that process happen, and I think we're heading in the right direction.
Okay, that's good. So, Marc, enough on processes. What is the one thing that you want to see happen?
I think what I want to see happen is has been already referred to, is that the progress made on paper must have an effect on the ground and very concrete decisions by the people responsible in order really to have mega sporting events respecting human rights, respecting the people, having an effect on the people that are in the context of these mega sporting events. And this is the toughest part of the road. As Patrick has said, the paperwork is the easy part. Setting the requirement is the easy part. And this is certainly something where we need to have it done. So this will be the reality test, and we will then have, let's say, we will then know if it has been passed or not.
Okay.
And from our side, it's about holding the sport governing bodies accountable for it.
Okay, well. Great word, accountability. Guy?
All the thunder has been stolen already, hasn't it? I think
Sorry.
It's all right. The two things, to reiterate, Marc, is concrete action, concrete examples and case studies on the ground of where the paperwork that everyone's working on now is actually achieving results. And then the second thing, to reiterate what John said, is awareness and understanding all the way down through the different actors who are involved in this. So it's all well and good having an individual or a couple of individuals at the top of an organisation or an international federation who understand this. But when you get to those individuals who are making decisions about where events are going to go and how events are going to be designed and delivered, then a proper working understanding, appreciation of child human rights is vital.
Okay, great. So we have education, enforcement, accountability, and an appreciation of the issues. Thanks very much, guys. Let's see what the audience have got. Gentleman in the front. Should be okay, just talk.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Benga Subai. I'm a media manager from a radio show based in New York. My question is to Mr. Gasser. Who gets held responsible when fans get unruly at major European championships, like we saw in France last year, when Croatian fans, Russian fans, England fans were fighting, throwing flares at the stadium? Who gets held accountable? The host country, the country's FA, or the fans? Thank you.
It's a good question, actually. The behaviour of fans at events. Who's responsible?
Well, within the stadium perimeter, it's UEFA, and outside the stadium perimeter, it's the authorities of the hosting country city.
But if we look at different countries whose fans were involved in disorder or other racism, I think you're referring to who's responsible for those fans.
Again, I mean, in France, you have French legislation kicking in inside the stadium. Outside the stadium, and within the stadium perimeter, we work with the Fair network. We have match observers which observe if there are any acts of racism and discrimination. Then they go to the UEFA control and disciplinary body, and then they're follow up by the sanctions accordingly, if there is evidence for that.
For Croatia, a lot of their fans were throwing flares on the field. Croatian FA was like, hey, it's the French. Pretty much the two countries were pushing it back and forth between them. Who, again, like I said, do you take it out on the Croatian FA or the host country? Because at some point, the country's FA has to pretty much tell their fans that this is unacceptable. Thank you.
The sanction within the stadium at the match, they're imposed in that case through on the Croatian FA.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions at all. Okay, well, listen, thank you very much for coming along and listening to this very enlightening debate. Thanks to all of our speakers for taking the time and traveling here. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks very much. Cheers.